And what if you'll begin and tell us, today is September 23rd, 2002, and we are speaking with.
Yeah, this is September 23rd, a Monday, and this is Paul Schneeberger, one of the three veterans that you're seeing on this video, I think, and I've been chosen to do the backup, the final. I've thought about this a great deal, and it's difficult. What message should we tell you? What message should you hear from us 20 years from now, right now, 50 years from now? And if you're listening to us, we've experienced things which probably make us pacifists, only because we've experienced them. What we say to you is trying to share our experience so that those thoughts, those experiences, make you aware of the horror of some of the actions we took, the need to take them, and how it motivated us to make the United States a better country. I came from Clifton, an area of Cincinnati, and I came through the period of a depression. There was a time my father was out of work for 3 years. So I learned self a little bit, how to take care of myself, what myself wanted. And one of the things that motivated me the most was wanting an education. So in the 6th grade, and like all of you will, somebody will touch your life that makes it important. And I had a 6th grade teacher that did that. So I moved on and wanted an education. And I graduated from high school with Dick Donahue, who you hear in this film, and Brandt. And I wanted a college education, but again, I didn't have the money. It wasn't available then. Maybe you have it now. But I went to work in a factory, and it was wartime. And I worked for the Lunkenheimer Valve Company making brass valves. And I remember so distinctly working from 6:18 in the morning until 12 hours later, 8:12 at night, we punched out. We made 44 cents an hour, but we got 66 cents for overtime. And a year of that work, turning green with brass dust, I had enough money to start to college. And I started to college at the College of Pharmacy, which was a private college in downtown Cincinnati. I was there a few months and was drafted. My career in the service was much different than Don's or Dick's, because I went into anti-aircraft artillery, the 165th Battalion in California. My first visit to California. What a wonderful place. I camped in Hebron, California, which was farm country. And it's all built up now. So take care of your country. Keep the litter off the ground.
Can we back up and you can tell
Yeah.
us again how you entered the Army and the Infantry Division?
Well, I'm getting there.
Okay.
I have 3 places.
All right.
It takes time for things to happen in the service. And fortunately, my IQ was high enough, so I was in California in an anti-aircraft battalion and went to Mojave Desert and spent the best part of 7 months on the Mojave Desert and formed Camp Irwin, which is now officially a Fort Irwin of the military. Then, my IQ being high enough, I was asked, would I like to go back to school? Well, education was important. So they said, at that time I had stripes, I was a non-commissioned officer. They said, you have to sign your stripes away and you can go to college. I said, fine. And they sent me to Pasadena Junior College, which is now Pasadena Community College. And I spent 6 weeks there doing research with monkeys, believe it or not. And then I was transferred to Purdue University with the intent of becoming a mechanical engineer. I completed in 9 months at Purdue 2 years of engineering because all I had to do was study, which was wonderful. But then the war changed in Europe, and in 24 hours they closed the ASTP program, which was the Army Specialized Training Program, and I was on a train headed for Texas. I got off the train and I was in the 102nd Infantry Division. My name is Schneeberger. It's not a really hard name, it's a Swiss name. But the troops that were there were old troops who had been in the Army a long time. They couldn't pronounce my name. So he said a bad word and said, when I say that, you sound off. I reacted and punched him, knocked him down, and I wound up as a machine gunner. We trained there. I went through my second training of basic training with the guns firing over your head and crawling in the dirt. And then we went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, at which point I had already asked my wife if she would marry me. I went home on a 3-day pass and flew in a DC-3, which took 5 hours from New York to Cincinnati. We were married, we had 2 weeks honeymoon, and then my division was sent overseas. We went through Camp Kilmer, and I was on the Marine Wolf for 12 days. And 3,000 troops were on board the ship, and I have to tell you the truth. Being a machine gunner, I did historically know that in World War I, a machine gunner lived for an average of 3 minutes. I said, this isn't a good position to be in, but I'm there. So on board ship, I didn't like the lines. They were serving food to 3,000 troops 24 hours a day. And you got boiled potatoes and butter. Well, I didn't care for that. And one day, one of the crew members of the ship, I was talking to him, complaining about the food. He says, come on with me. So I went with him, and there was a sign, off limits. I said, I can't go there. He says, forget it, come on. So I go up a flight of stairs, and I'm taken to the crew's mess. My goodness, steak, gravy, mashed potatoes, vegetables. So the rest of the trip on board ship, I had fine food, and they couldn't find me because I was dressed like 3,000 other guys. And I really didn't care. I wasn't going anywhere except aboard ship. The convoy we were in had 80 ships, and we were attacked by submarines close by, I must tell you. And one gentleman was in the hold of the ship doing work on laundry, and when the depth charges fired, it just was horrible noise in the ship, and this fellow took off running, and when we found him, he was topside, had a carton of cigarettes in each hand, and we asked him, where are you going? He said, I don't know, but I'm going to smoke. And so anyway, that was one of the funny things, I suppose. And when they had abandoned ship drill, running up and down the stairs wasn't a lot of fun, so buddy of mine and I would crawl aboard the life rafts on the deck and sleep, take a nap. We were doing fine. We wound up in Weymouth Harbor, England, and the next day we crossed over to France. And this was about a month after the invasion. Part of the Cherbourg Peninsula had not been completely cleaned out of German troops. Some of our troops were doing that. We were in a field in France with pup tents, mud. In fact, General Eisenhower came to our division, and he says, "Those boys should all have rubber boots." And the next day a truck arrived with a bunch of boots, and we had to put them on. But the mud was 6 inches deep, so when we left there was a field of boots. It just sucked them off our feet. There was no need. We moved on, and this map shows the areas we were in. Now, Dick talked about some towns. If you can look at this, there are names of towns all over this. And basically, we came from this area, which is taken out into an area of Krefeld, and then all the way up to a point when we were 13 miles from Berlin. My experiences during this whole thing were not friendly. And being an infantryman changes you. You're partly human. You're scared. But you're at a point you know you gotta do it. So, in our progress through these towns, incidents happened. I remember the first man that got killed. We were a secret organization, by the way. That's what we were told. When we hit the front line, loudspeakers from the enemy's side said, "Welcome, 102nd Division." And since then, I've always questioned where our intelligence was. And I noticed currently our intelligence is very poor. So let me suggest, if you're in 2020 or 2030 and seeing this, learn 2 languages. Learn 3 if you can. Learn 4. And then use them, because communications is a lot better than shooting. But anyway, my experiences included one of being behind enemy lines for 8 hours. The town was Mönchengladbach, which is on here. And we were in an advance party getting ready to place our unit. And I was told that the officer that was leading us was a famous person. I don't want to quote that because I'm not sure. But we got lost. We pulled up, and here's an 88 that Dick spoke about. This was a rifle. It was a cannon, but it was a rifle. It had rifling in it. And when those shells came at you and when they hit, they burst like a Japanese fan. If you were in front of them, you kissed your little tokus goodbye because you couldn't survive it. We spent 8 hours in Mönchengladbach. We pulled this gun out of the way. There was a tree across the road. The Jeep, we hooked the Jeep to it, pulled it out of the way. We had a Jeep and a truck, and there were 40 of us on this advance party. We drove into Mönchengladbach about 10 blocks, made a left turn, and the world ended right there. We were in a fight. We were unaware that the town had not been taken. I can't name names because I don't remember them, but our Jeep driver took the Jeep, and 5 guys, while we fired covering fire, got on the Jeep and they got out of town. When they got out, he said, I'm not going back. And we had a person in our group who was a Graves registration. His job was to take care of those of us that didn't make it. He says, well, give me your Jeep. And he made 5 trips and brought all of us out. When we came out of Mönchengladbach, the 29th Division was coming in. And they said, where have you guys been? We'd already been written off the books. We said, we were in town. They said, we're supposed to take it. Be our guest, that's the way. And we rejoined our unit, and they were glad to see us again because they were searching for replacements already. As we moved up in combat, we took towns in Germany, and we had to cross the Ruhr River. This was an amphibious crossing. Up till then, I had been pulled out of the machine gun section and made a company runner. My job was to keep communications open between the company and battalion headquarters. My partner, Ted Sexton, and I, we'd flip cards, anything, to decide who went with the company and who stayed with battalion. When we got ready to cross the Ruhr River, and prior to that, we had a bad fight. I'm a little out of sequence here, excuse me for that, but the bad fight, we started out with 200 men and 7 officers, and by the time we reached the Ruhr River, we had 57 of us left and no officers. Excuse me. Anyway, we still had to cross the river, so the orders came down, and all of them were typewritten for the first time. And I got the privilege of going with the company, which meant I crossed the river in a boat. Now you understand, on the other side were the enemy, in fact a Panzer division. But I got hit immediately as we started to cross at 3:30 in the morning. The terrain, we started out on level ground and dropped down to a field, then over to a dike which held the river in. Our boats were lying on the side of the dike and we had to go up. At the top of the dropping down was a tank firing tracer bullets so we could see where we were. Again, communications. A mortar shell hit below me, and understand I was going to cross the river, didn't know how long we were going to be over there to get support. So I had 2 bandoliers of ammunition on me. I had 8 grenades. I had 2 300 radio batteries for the radios that they used at that time, which were like big backpacks. Anyway, once that mortar shell hit, the concussion blew me up in the air. I hit the ground and knocked my breath out. And when I finally recovered, I can't use the language that was used then, you know. But when I recovered, I couldn't find the batteries. But I said, I'm in a dangerous position, and I took off and caught up with the group. Got in a boat, we went across, and we were in and secure in our objective at 8:30 when we weren't supposed to be there till 10:30. I must take a sidetrack there. In any infantry battalion, there's always somebody goofing off. And there was a Lieutenant Rogers, and we had to go out on patrols in the middle of the night, and we didn't know the territory, and we took a beating. We were poor patrollers. So he chose to form a group that would do the patrolling for the division, for our battalion. All companies, didn't matter where a patrol had to go out, they were going to take care of it. And actually he recruited all the goof-offs that every officer thought he had. I wasn't part of that group, thank you. But they did all our patrolling, and from that day on, they never lost a man. They got wounded. But before we crossed the river, they sent them over there. And they did two things. One, the Germans had a stick mine made of concrete and nuts and bolts and anything that would kill you. And we didn't know how to disarm them. So they sent them over to bring back a sample so we could figure them out. They brought 32 back. Then they went over before this attack and they killed 33 Germans before we ever got on the other side of the river. So that helped us. My partner had to wait until they built a footbridge to come across the river. And they finally got the footbridge in. Now you understand, we were taking territory that the enemy knew where everything was. So they had that river completely zeroed in on everything. And the engineer battalion did a marvelous job under tremendous fire. They lost a lot of men. But they did get the footbridge in. They also got a bridge in for the tanks, which took a little longer. My partner was in the middle of the footbridge when a mortar shell hit him and killed him. So we moved on, in spite of that. And then the bulge occurred. We were on the front line with the 2nd Armored Division and the 82nd Airborne. When the bulge hit, the 106th Division got absolutely clobbered. So they pulled the 2nd Armored and the 82nd Airborne out from our front line, moved them over to the bulge area, and we pulled up and took over a 3-division front. We had 100 yards between foxholes. And it was cold, wintertime. Officers, and I wasn't one, had liquor ration that they had. And that night, I remember, whatever night it was in November, that the officer came around, I don't know where he came from even, I can't tell you his name, but he brought his booze with him and he gave all of us a little shot in our canteen. It was a good drink. Excellent. One of the better ones. Anyway, we moved on to eventually 13 miles from Berlin. Understand, we lost a lot of men. My company had over 600% replacement. The reunions that I go to now, I started going to in 1988, but were formed originally in 1949. We are still going into reunions. The people that were in my machine gun section, I have one man. He and I have both shared. He was president of the National Reunion Organization, and so was I. So that was the beginning, I suppose, of our time in civilian life, where we started giving back. Among those things in Berlin, though, that bothered us, we were 13 miles from Berlin. My company was chosen to go into Berlin. And then Yalta happened. And President Roosevelt and the Russian leader and the British leader were there. And they decided we had to pull back 100 miles and give it to the Russians. I didn't like it, I still don't. If we fight for territory, we should keep it and not be cruel, not be dictators. And we're facing that problem today, friends, and that's why I talk about education. That's why I talk about communication, because it's much easier than what we had to do. I'd like to take you now a little bit after the war. I came home in a ship, got back to my wife, went back to school, and Dick talked about the GI Bill. what a wonderful piece of legislation. And it took a group of motivated people, educated them, and brought them to a situation where our country is better for it. It's something we should continue. And I agree with Dick's statement that every high school student upon graduation should spend at least 2 years in the service for the discipline, for the camaraderie, and for the understanding of others. It's essential that we do that, in my opinion.
Can you estimate for me the distance when you were coming through Germany? I know you said you got within 13 miles of Berlin.
Correct.
How far of a distance was this from where you started in Cherbourg?
Oh, mercy.
Just an estimate?
You understand, there's something about the service you have to understand, and about Dick's duty in the Air Force and Don's. It takes at least 10 men, or 10 people, 10 persons, to keep one man actively in combat. It may be different in the Navy, and it may be different in the Air Force, but in the infantry, it takes 10 people to supply, to do all the things, just to keep one man able to fight. So, you know, it's a matter of assignment. This is your job, whatever it may be. And you do that because you're loyal to your country. And that's, the Germans were loyal to their country in many respects. What the problem was that they were lied to in many ways. You know, and our combat, let me tell you, we took a town called Wells, Germany, and we were bombed by our own planes. Whose fault was it? Ours, because we got there a half hour early. Who could plan when you're going to fight and get to an objective? Impossible. And the communications weren't good enough to call off the strike. We did lose some men. But that's war. You do lose people. Anyway, let me get to today. Because I think what happened after the war is just as important as the war. And if you look at your history and read it anywhere, you'll find that the men who came back were real first-class citizens. They wanted to make a better country. This hat is HALO, Hughes Alumni Organization. That's where the three of us came from. And we're still together. And understand that. This hat is part of my memory. Combat infantry. This hat, with all the debris on it, tells how we spent time and what we wanted to do about some things. Part of my career involved getting involved in community. I loved my community and worked hard, and this booklet was made as a history of the community that I lived in and some of the things we did. We had support for that. I was fortunate enough to be appointed a township trustee and did my civil duty then. I think it's important not to fault politicians because there's an element among society, it's called greed, G-R-E-E-D, and it motivates people in funny ways. If you can control that, you'll have a good country. You'll have good things. if people become greedy, that's when troubles occur. And we're in that today. And historically, I hope it doesn't happen again. Be careful.
Do you feel that that love of community is a direct result of the having to give patriotically, or do you think the type of people that go into the service, this would be more today since we are in a voluntary service type of a setting, are attracted to the service?
Probably not. That's why we speak of mandatory 2 years. Because people want to use the service as a place to dump some incorrigible. Or somebody they can't take the responsibility for and want the service to do it. I don't know what their percentage of development is of these young people, but if it's mandatory and it's the correct kind of discipline, how to wash your clothes, how to iron your clothes, how to brush your teeth, how to keep yourself clean, how to avoid a problem, how to suffer the discipline of getting into a problem. If they do it right, and I don't mean, a good leader has 3 qualities. He's a part dictator, he's part autocrat, and part democrat. Depending on the circumstances, he may make one of these decisions. Good leadership, he blends all 3. And when he does that, he has a team.
How frequently did you see good leaders?
In the service?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think I saw them a lot. They're gone. I interviewed Colonel Parks, who was our battalion leader down in Florida some years ago. He's gone now. And he voiced the politics of the officers. But they had to make decisions. I mean, they didn't have a choice. They had an objective. They didn't want to lose people, but they did. And they had to live with that. I think they were good leaders. Yeah. There's always somebody that isn't, for whatever reason. Through fear. Dick told you about people that jumped out of planes because they didn't want to go. We had a man shoot his toe off just so he didn't have to go. Fear is it's a controlling device. That's what Hitler used. Fear. In a lot of ways. But overall, we had good leaders. We had good leaders. I think we had poor communications. I think we need to improve those. I think we had terrible intelligence. Absolutely terrible.
Do you think that was due partly in just a time component where there was a time lag, or was it the sources, or a combination of many things?
You know what? I think it was due to American ego. We trusted people, and we were easily captivated. And how did they know? We were supposed to be a secret outfit. How did they know and announce us? Somebody talked. I don't know how you control that. Right now, today, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld speaks about the people that are talking out of turn. That's intelligence. That's somebody's information. We have to be smarter, much smarter. about these sort of things. I don't know the answers. I don't pretend to know the answers. But I'm just a little person in a great big pond of people, and I see it. And if I see it, somebody higher up better see it.
When you hear news reports, for instance, this week we heard that a possible attack on Iraq may occur January, February. When you hear reports like that, is that so much common knowledge that it's not even considered?
You know, this is the problem with intelligence. They know a lot more than you understand. They know a lot more than I understand. Hindsight, I can tell you the answers. Foresight, I can't. And I think the logistics of any move that they would make. But let me ask you this question, or find out what I think about. Do you know that many of the shelters in Iraq were built by American companies? That they knew the exact plan of those buildings? You see, that's intelligence. That's information. They know where things are and as far as deposing a Saddam Hussein that we talk about, it's in the current news. I'm a pacifist now. I've heard the bees. I'm scared. Honestly scared. It's not fun to fight like that. So bring it down to individuals. If your son has to be on the front line and can get killed doing that, do you want him there? I don't. I think we need to communicate. I think we need to learn to speak Arabic. Right now they're crying in the newspapers, and that's intelligence. We're saying we don't know how to speak with you. What a dumb thing. You know, learn. We need to learn. We need to teach it in our schools. We need to communicate. And if you aren't able to hear, that's another part of the communication. You've got to listen. If you don't listen, we have a colleague that was in our class in high school, Clifton, I can't say his last name now. He speaks 12 languages. He's a member, I think, of the CIA.
Cliff Butcher?
Butcher. Cliff Butcher. He's traveled all over the world. He's worked on many projects. And I can tell you, that's as much as I know about him. That's as much as I know about him. I don't know what, I think he's maybe retired by now, but because he was talking about it. But he was in every possible country, and his purpose was to listen. Yes, call him a spy if you want. They're here in this country. We found that out the hard way. And it's all about communicating. And I really don't think, I don't know why, yes I do know why. It's a 3-letter word, not a 4-letter word. It's OIL. And we're building cars now, and they're being advertised now. We get as much as 47 to 70 miles. That's a step in the right direction. We're doing things to make us not so dependent on oil. But I think in a broader view, we're not thinking clearly about our resources. You know?
When we go back to your time in the service, did you feel that we hear a lot about the conception or the idea that the soldiers had a sense of duty and a sense of more than themselves, the patriotic sense that we hear so much about with the World War II soldier. Was that apparent among your?
I had a dear friend, I knew his mother and dad, and he was on the ship that I was on going overseas. He was in my regiment, but he was in a different company. He was in a town called Linnich, Germany, where that's when we lost our man and they took a lot. His parents, his dad, quite frankly, was secretary, treasurer of Aluminum Industries in Cincinnati. And he wasn't a bad boy, he was a great kid. But they wanted the best for him, and they sent him off to military school. In taking Linnich, Germany, he got wounded. And they told him, now this is the true story of what happened to him. They told him to go back to the aid station. But they had a machine gun bearing down on him. He went back after it and was killed. And after the war, I met with his parents. What could I say? What could I possibly tell them? He was a motivated citizen who did what he thought was right at that moment, at that crisis. So, I've been back to Europe, actually 22 times. And that time I went back for the 50th anniversary of the war. I went to the cemeteries. I cried a lot. And I don't have the paper here. Can we break for a second? I want to tell you about this one letter I brought, because I think it's important to say, since we're getting philosophical. Okay, I'm ready.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about my reunion group of the Ozark Division, which I joined not as a matter of choice, but I share with these people now the fact that we survived and came back together. It's a great organization, and at this point in time, 2002, we're in a dilemma. We're all 80 years old or close to 80 years old, and the question came up in our reunion, where do we go from here? As we progressed through the years, since 1949, we started a scholarship fund. And most recently, it's reached $20,000 a year in $1,000 increments. And that's a problem. And the money that's there currently, General Douglas, one of our generals who passed away, has left $100,000 to that fund. The fund itself is currently at about $140,000. So, what do we do? Where do we go from here is the question. And they want to turn it over to the children of the veterans. 50-year-old children now, okay? What's the motivation? And it created we just completed our reunion in August in New Orleans, and it was the whole reunion was talking about this. This note, did you read this? Did
I
you
haven't
have
had
to
a
read
chance to yet.
Well, let me read this a little bit, if I may, share it with you. The question I put up was, where is the amendment? We have to amend our Constitution and bylaws to turn the organization over to someone to deal with it. And there was a group motivated by one of my closest friends who was in the machine gun section with me to turn it over to the children. And these are the questions that I felt needed to be dealt with, which weren't properly dealt with. The who, what, where, and how, proposed in publications, does not focus on the control of funds, proposed ending of the association, accountability of scholarship selection and fund control, respect to donors who donate to the, who gets to vote, and many other questions which are unanswered. These questions must be answered in the first draft of an amendment to our Constitution and redrafted until an acceptable amendment is achieved. Now, I wanted to caution them, so I said, about our associate family members. The infused enthusiasm for change at age 50, raising your family, fighting the war of terrorism. Should we put the burden of remembering our history on your plate of responsibility? We think not. That's the group that is saying no to this change. We ask all Ozark veterans to think carefully about the proposed amendment, yet to be seen. Consider the many questions, not only our status, but also remembering those who never shared a reunion, participated in the GI Bill, but paid with their lives, so that we may, in a democratic manner, make a correct decision. And I go on. But the point is, even here is a problem that we want to dump on the future of these young people. So when you do things, you have to consider, where is it going? And what's it going to do? I was asked the question about Iraq and what's going on there. I don't know the answer yet, but I know we need to communicate about it. I know we need to ask a lot of questions. And I don't think they can be just the emotional questions. I think they have to be the hard questions. These are hard questions. And you have to have the courage to ask and solve the problems. That's how this country grew, because we did that. But we've got an element going on now. We've failed in education. We failed. Not totally, no. But somewhere we've failed, because we've got people who break in doors, go into meetings, and intimidate people into changing their mind. That's wrong. That's not the way to do it. That's anarchy, and we don't need it. Anyway, my lecture is over. I thank all of you for listening to our statements, talking about the war. I hope you listened to what we said. I hope you read. I hope you use libraries to check some of the history. If you question something, find out what you're saying has merit and has a basis. Be sure you know what you're doing before you jump. And I thank you for interviewing me.
And we thank you. Very nice. Very nice.